Good afternoon and good day to everybody who has joined to this session today. We are still in our week of UN 2.0 and our session today is Green Horizons, Scaling Climate Solutions for a Sustainable Planet. This session will focus on understanding insights on environment, and just to recap that UN 2.0, as Secretary General put it, is a week that is building on the expertise and culture that we need to serve member states in the 21st century. And I quote his words when he was opening that we cannot solve 21st century issues with 20th century tools. We need to have a forward-looking culture, which is built on data, which is built on innovation, digitization, strategic foresight, and behavioral science. These are important tools because we are living in a very dynamic and fast-moving world, and we need the 5 skill sets so that UN can make better partner with the member states. And I quote his last sentence where he said, change is not easy, but change is essential. So in today's session, we are going to hear insightful, practical examples from presenters who have had innovative solutions in their countries. Allow me to introduce to you our 3 amazing presenters. We have Reina Otsuka, who is the lead innovation for nature, climate, and energy. We have Jorge Luis Castaneda, economist from the World Bank. We also have Jason Jabor, senior program coordinator in UNEP with the Office of the Chief Scientist. I would like to pause here and just tee up with a question from the participants, and would like to hear from you. What are some of the innovative approaches and technologies that make significant contributions to address climate change and promote sustainability? Please feel free to use the chat and air in your comments of what these significant contributions are. Great. Greetings, everybody, and looking forward to your comments.
Irene, it seems as if people are still slowly warming up. Do you have an innovative approach that you are excited about and that you think will make a significant contribution?
Let me just recap the question again. We would like to hear from you participants all over the world as you are connecting. What are some of the innovative approaches and technologies that can make significant contributions to address climate change and promote sustainability? Citizen science, AI, I see interesting concerns on the use of artificial intelligence, the use of Internet of Things, proven models that address environmental sustainability, behavioral science, youth, amazing, satellite, great. Large language models. AI is the hot topic. I see the common theme coming around is the use of artificial intelligence. Thank you so much. We'll keep monitoring the chat, and allow me to give the floor and hand it over to Reina, who will take us through her presentation. Over to you, Reina. The floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Irene. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, wherever you are. My name is Reina Otsuka. I'm the lead of the Digital Innovation for Nature and Climate working at the United Nations Development Program. And I would like to present today one project that we've been working on and have a discussion after this. So in the next slide, you will see um, I'll start from the problem framing. So climate change is a huge problem, as we all know. There's different aspects to it, but we focused for this project on the government system or the public infrastructure. And UNDP is supporting more than 120 countries through something called the Climate Promise. We actually launched a new version of the Climate Promise just yesterday with the Secretary General also in the event. We support the nationally determined contributions or NDCs on their ambition, how to accelerate the NDC implementation, and also to be inclusive. And through this support, we noticed that managing the data on the greenhouse gas inventory or the NDC targets and actions, what are the carbon credits that are being issued and how are they being exported. These data is really challenging to manage. And we noticed that many countries were expressing the need to develop very similar systems and registries all over the place. And we also noticed that because each country was working on it standalone, um, it leads to use of fragmented solutions. It also leads to longer lead time because each country has to start from scratch to design these digital systems. And also, there were some vendor lock-ins happening, and duplicate effort was really a big issue. And we also noticed that if you think about a lot of these, transparency data or carbon credit data, it requires exchange between different systems. It requires exchange with the private sector company systems, or it might require interoperability with other national systems, other international systems. It also requires a lot of data to be accumulated in order to, I see a lot of people are interested in AI, but in order for artificial intelligence to work, you need a strong data backend. You also need to have a strong data governance. And we noticed that a lot of these were still in the making for a lot of these countries. And so how we tried to solve this issue, the intervention was actually something we call a digital public good. I'm not sure if everybody's heard of this term, but if you can switch to the next slide, the digital public good is basically open source, open data solutions that is well documented and contributes to the sustainable development goals. And so we took this digital public good approach, which means that instead of supporting each country on a bespoke system that's only tailored for their need, we tried to build it as an open source code base with good documentation so that any country can install and configure it and create it as their own national sovereign system so that they can track and manage their NDC actions and greenhouse gas emission inventory, carbon credits, all of those necessary data in their sovereign system. This was collectively built and managed with inputs from over 40 countries. We also work closely with World Bank, EBRD, other agencies, and it's following, of course, international guidelines. Because we're working with all of these different international actors, and we also try to receive feedback from the private sector companies, it's already ready with the APIs so that it can facilitate interoperability with different platforms and different private sector-led solutions from the beginning and be interoperable so that it can facilitate different types of reporting and carbon credit trade. And so the impact we were proposed to talk about in terms of the impact, we are still in progress. This project started as a very small prototype last year, but within a year, and if you could go to the next slide, please. Within a year, we worked with Namibia, who used this code base to create their own digital carbon registry, so that they can start a carbon credit trading. We also worked with Indonesia, who had their own system, but they also again leveraged on the code base that we had, so that they can improve the registry and the transparency system that they were already developing. And also, we're just starting with Seychelles. We just had a kickoff workshop a month ago to build their digital transparency system, which is going to help them to start collecting all of these climate change related data in one place. And all the other countries on the map you see, we are starting to engage with them. We also have a community of practice so that even if you're not already starting on the development, a lot of knowledge exchange and self-cooperation have been happening already with a lot of countries. So I'll stop here. And yeah, back to you, Arina.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Reina, for insightful presentation on digital transparency and digital public good. I just have one follow-up question on what would be the main difference of digital and non-digital projects for scalability if you reflect on the innovation that you have just presented?
Sure, good question. I come from more traditional innovation field actually, and I think one big difference is the replicability and scalability. In the digital world, we think of how can we make it 10 times scalable, 10 times faster, 10 times more cost efficient. And I think it's much easier to bring one solution or build a solution that can be applied to many, many different contexts with minimum tweaking. So I think one difference one thing we want to think about as digital specialists in the UN is to look for a common fundamental feature that we can develop as a core solution, which might be a digital public good, or it could be called a digital public infrastructure as well. And then leave the rest to localization and the local innovators to work on. So I think, while we always follow the same principle of user-centered design, we always try to add a scalability lens to it so that all these solutions can scale faster and across different contexts more easily.
Thank you. Thank you, Rina. And thank you so much. We look forward we'll get you back to Q&A. I'm sure there are going to be follow-up questions and recommendations. I now hand over the floor to Jorge Luis. We want to hear the innovation from the World Bank. The floor is yours for the next 5 minutes.
Hi, everyone. Switching my camera on. Okay, so very nice to be here. It is a pleasure to participate in this inspiring week. I'm JL Castañeda. I'm from the Mind, Behavior, and Development team, the embed team within the World Bank, the Behavioral Sciences unit at the bank. And I'm here to tell you how beans can save lives. Well, not really, but they can substantially improve them by applying behavioral sciences. And today I'll present an initiative that uses beans to improve cooking efficiency in Rwanda. But first, in the next slide, I'll explain to you how we implement behavioral informed solutions at embed. We first start with reinterpreting policy challenges in terms of behavior. So for instance, in the case of Rwanda's energy access challenge becomes instead a matter of most households cooking with polluting fuels. So that's precisely the behavior we want to change, how we change this cooking behavior and switching these polluting fuels for more sustainable ones. Second, we identify the factors that hinder the adoption of efficient stoves and fuels through different research methods. We combine qualitative and quantitative approaches to understand these barriers. Third, we outline and narrow down possible solutions to the most feasible and relevant for the context. Fourth, we implement and assess the impact of our chosen solution with rigorous evaluation methods, such as randomized control trials. And finally, we disseminate our results and scale them up, especially the ones that have been proved successful. In Rwanda, we applied this approach, as I'll show in the next slide. And starting in 2019, we interviewed potential stove users and also other relevant stakeholders to understand their journey of obtaining a clean cook stove. We use what Reina just mentioned, this user experience approach. And we try to learn from the first step of learning about clean cook stoves to using it in a habitual way. We then mapped out the barriers they face. We found, for example, in the case of Rwanda, that people underestimate clean cooking benefits. Because of this, clean cooking was seen as an addition to traditional cooking rather than a substitute. And it was perceived as a complex and demanding task. This is on top of the well-known and well-documented barriers that we know, for example, in terms of financial constraints. So what did we do? And moving on to the next slides, we use these results to prototype solutions informed by behavioral science, and then we test their feasibility and cultural relevance. We identify bean soaking before cooking as a promising solution for Rwanda, which has the highest per capita bean consumption. This practice can reduce cooking time by half and can be combined with traditional methods. So our solution included community training and interactive calendars, which are being shown in the slides. And with this, we address the low awareness issue of the benefits by providing information in a simple and relatable language. So for example, you can see there that we introduced Mutesi, who had saved time and money by soaking her beans. Also, we tap on traditions and provided a to-do list and reminders to soak the beans a day before the customary Sunday family meal, and that's included in the calendar right there. We also organized public demonstrations to show how easy it was to pre-soak the beans, challenge beliefs regarding taste and cooking, and commit to continuing this learning practice. Our results reveal that participants reduced their overall cooking time by 30 minutes, and bean cooking specifically by 40 minutes. This significant impact could reduce fuel expenses for low-income families and lessen their exposures to harmful emissions. We also observed more positive attitudes towards clean cooking, but clean cook stove ownership didn't change. However, our work demonstrates the potential of behavioral science and how they can effectively inform and design implementation, the design and implementation of climate environment policies. Lastly, on the next slide, I'll show you how all of this knowledge generated has been well documented and is available to the public, along with more resources on our work at Embed and the World Bank on climate and environment. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Roheb. Quite interesting. I love the slide with the infographics, which says the old way is not always the best way. This really requires the use of behavioral science and not just digitization. Thank you. One follow-up question from me is the involvement of government in the project and the process and the resources for this cooking project in Rwanda in the field. Would you just shed some more light, please?
Absolutely. And this has been a very interesting process because everything that we do is by the hand of the clients, of the governments. Precisely this, and specifically this intervention, we collaborated a lot with the government of Rwanda. We aimed for this study to inform a program that has been rolled out, a clean cooking access program. And precisely the next step of our intervention is to use this learning to scale them up within the government program. So we will be working closely with the government, trying to identify entry points, locations, target populations that could benefit from interventions like this, maybe tweaking it a little bit, changing a little bit the language and adapting it even better to their conditions. And that will be the next step of the intervention.
What about the resources required? Should it be replicated to another country?
So, of course, we will love to try to replicate this. The good thing about behaviorally informed interventions is that, as you can see, they can potentially be not very resource intense. So as you can see, the intervention was really much about information being provided, communication and outreach materials. along with this community-based training. So many governments have already in place this structure of engaging with citizens. So this would be just an add-on to their ongoing outreach activities. That is the case precisely of this program. So hopefully existing programs from governments can use these resources just as an addition and maybe better inform their outreach activities with behavioral science.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I would like now to invite Jason from UNEP to present on initiatives from the field. Over to you, Jason. The floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Irene. Just not sure the camera's working here, but we'll proceed as is. So yeah, my name is Jason Jabor, and I work with the UN Environment Programs. Apologies. The UN Environment Program's Office of the Chief Scientist, and we provide strategic coordination on the science and the analytics that really informs UNEP's priorities and various aspects of its work, including its work on emerging issues. And with that, it's also our remit to deepen the organization's capacities in foresight and to evolve a more forward-looking culture. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit. And that brings me to this this slide, this image. And it's from a special report of the Economist called Global Firefighting. And it was released on the eve of the UN 75th anniversary about 4 years ago with the headline Mission Impossible. And really the crux of the story here is that it posits that the UN is ostensibly taking on more than it was designed for. And it points to this this disconnection or this mismatch, if you will, between the scale of the compounding crisis that we face in the UN system and the resources at our command. But I think, the missing nuance, if you will, is what I want to hone in on. And that's what we've heard already, and we've heard over the course of this week, is that there's an equal imperative to modernize our tools, really, and to push the limits, even the rigidities of some of our approaches and ways of thinking. And that's where foresight comes into this. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit and share some of the experiences that we've been having at UNEP. Next slide, please, in standing up really what is a foresight process. Now, you might be asking, what is foresight? Good question. This is a visualization that really shares a lot of ideas of what foresight is and isn't. The first thing I think to note is that really foresight is, you could think of it as a structured participatory process to essentially create collective knowledge, right, about the medium to long-term future, within the limits of what's possible. And it draws on a number of different tools and methods to make sense of these insights. And the foundational tool that we have been using is horizon scanning. And this is really a way of detecting early signs of change, or clues, right, that point us in a direction that's different than today, right? Whether it be a significant or small development, it's usually something that could be potentially disruptive. It's also important to distinguish what foresight is not. And if you had looked at the weather 2 days ago to see what the forecast was for Nairobi, you would turn to what our friends at the Bureau of Meteorology have provided, which is that it would be 23 degrees and rainy, and with some very specific predictions, if you will, extrapolations from past data about what the future is going to look like. And that is exactly what foresight isn't. Foresight is not a function or about really prediction. It's about the possibility of minimizing surprises, right? And because of that, it deliberately requires us to look in places that we don't typically look in, and to operate kind of on the edges of plausibility. So next step, please. Or next slide, please. Thank you. So over the course of the last 18 months, UNEP has been building, internal capabilities for applying foresight and really building our muscle to be more anticipatory, and I would say less able to be surprised by shocks or circumstance. And in the process, we've been conducting what we call a foresight exercise over 23 and into 24, and this is this will in the first instance culminate in a global report. So to start, we really scoped a wide range of inputs, signs of change, And we did this through a global survey, a large global survey, but we also constructed 4 diverging scenarios, plausible futures of 2050. And the next phase really included a series of sense-making sessions, we can call them, with a wide spectrum of participants, experts, practitioners, informed stakeholders, essentially, through structured debate about these observations, right? And in doing so, we've identified 29 emerging issues, but perhaps more importantly, what we have distilled through this process is somewhere in the order of maybe 20, weaker signals of change. Okay, this was distilled from nearly 1,200 contributions, and these are signs that we need to keep an eye on, right? So look, the global issues, as we all know, requires obviously a global perspective, but it's also really crucial that we consider the unique contexts of locale and region and geography, which we've already heard. And that's why the Foresight has incorporated this strong regional element. What surprised us in the process, and I won't give away everything because we are in the final throes of finalizing these insights, but who you are and where you are really changes your perspective. And it is for that reason that when trying to scale, as we've heard our 2 previous speakers talk about, we have some cognition of the local context. So as I said, this is going to culminate in a report that's due out in July with these insights, but the real impact, I think, hinges on, if I can be so bold, is really about what we UNEP will do with these issues. And I think it's fair to say we stand the most to gain, so to speak, from these derived insights, and we're going to be better positioned, not just to take anticipatory action, if you will, but to adjust what's already in the pipeline and really to the nature of some of these changes. So thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Jason. Insightful information with the possibility of minimizing surprises. You're very right. Right now in Nairobi, we are all thrown with surprises every morning. I wanted to follow up with one clarification question. When you reflect on the UNEP process, on how you have described, how does an organization embed or scale the new approach, future thinking or foresight? How easy, in a nutshell, how could that take?
I'm not sure it's easy, but it's a fantastic question. I think the operative word is embed. Look, I think the process of anticipation, even outside of foresight, is it's a practice, right? And it's not happening in a vacuum. And so by that virtue, I think foresight as a practice is ostensibly a culture shift. It's an organizational shift. And so from that lens, what we have found is that this can't be isolated to one part of the house, one area of the organization. These are skills and mindsets and tools that need to be really spread across the organization. And from that perspective, I think there's an obvious top-down element. I think there needs to be a certain level of buy-in, and look, dealing with uncertainty isn't comfortable. It's actually a very difficult space, and so embracing uncertainty is even more difficult. But you need the leadership certainly to be on board with that. And then I think there's a bottom-up component in that you could have great signals of things on the horizon and potential threats and have some great data about that, but ultimately it's what you do with it. And so I think an organization needs to be ready to be almost the recipient of these insights. But great question.
Yeah, great. I also wanted to understand how you use the foresight to inform policy or drive change. Have you thought about that, or has it been applied yet?
Yeah, of course we've been thinking about that, and there are perhaps 2 angles to this. Foresight in and of itself, and deriving these insights about what could be coming down, what could be on the horizon, that on the surface might look like noise, or might look like an issue that isn't worthy of preoccupation. And I think that's really the challenge, is figuring out and separating, the noise, because you could derive a lot of signals if you canvass enough people and look in enough places about what could be coming down the pipe. I think what's important is to connect the possibility of disruption for a certain set of signals against your existing policies, and that's where I think the process is very different than prediction, if you will. It's not necessarily predicting that A and B and C will transpire. It's how do our existing policies, how will they be affected in the presence of these different trends or these disruptions. And so this is something that we're working with at a regional level, and eventually we want to take it to a more local level, where we're assisting countries where we can and stakeholders where we can to test their assumptions and their policies against what we're seeing.
Thank you so much. We now open the floor for all participants to answer, to put in their questions, and I'll just be reading in random order. We have a question for you, Rena, which says, are you finding that national governments can implement the open source solution you have described, or is it additional technical support that is needed? What have been some of the challenges of rolling out new digital systems across member states?
Sure, thank you. Thank you for the good questions. So we actually don't use the term rollout. We consider this as one of the tools that we can bring to the countries that we support as part of a bigger theory of change. And taking Jason's word, embedding is really, really important. As a digital team, we won't go out and suddenly, present this to the government. It is usually embedded within a wider support that UNDP provides to countries, which is about helping the capacity of enhanced transparency. It's about supporting to establishing an inclusive and integrity carbon market regulation. And so we try to embed this digital system solution as part of these overall offers. And that's how it's been scaling as well. In terms of how much technical support, we do have a central team that provides technical assistance to the countries when they actually roll out the system. But it's actually not the technology itself. It's more about the process that we advise on. For example, it has to be localized. So it's not just you install the system and start using. It needs to be embedded with the stakeholders' needs. There's different validation processes, verification processes within the country. So what we do is just try to support on the process of establishing a workshop to get these stakeholder inputs. And then the actual installation and configuration, the more technology side, that's actually very easy to do. It's all documented. It's all on GitHub, open sourced. So it should be fairly straightforward for a local vendor to do it. And we also really insist on having a local vendor and a local IT officer to take this ownership and build the system themselves, so that there's sustainability and ownership to the system in the longer term. So we don't try to just ship it to the country. I hope that answered the questions.
It was sufficient. I hope so. To JL, what do you think the findings from Rwanda can be applied to other countries in the region very quickly, and where the behaviors knowledge may be similar in replicability to other countries of the cooking initiative you mentioned? Over to you, JL.
Thanks, and that's a great question. I think it's not only specific to this intervention, this initiative, but to any behavioral intervention. And I think it has two parts. I'll try to be brief. The very first one has to do with everything my colleagues have mentioned already. So everything that has to do with the capacity, the interest, the buy-in from governments. There has to be the interest from the governments to be able to replicate this work. Just think on the perspective of policymakers. There's 10,000 priorities that they have, and maybe sometimes behavioral science is not seen as one of them. So trying to show this as a complementary approach is very important. That's the very first part of the answer. The second one has to do with an aspect that is critical for behavioral science. And as you remember in this loop, this diagram that I showed, the very first step is defining and diagnosis. That really means to be very much contextual driven. So although in appearances, the behaviors and context might seem similar, there really needs to be an effort, a research effort, to try to adapt as much as possible all of these interventions to the local context. So yes, on paper, it could be replicated, and we actually aim to do that. But in reality, you do have to invest a little bit on trying to make sure that all of the lessons are adapted to the local context. This is critical.
Yes, there's also a question for you, Jason, on the data that is being used in the foresight. A participant wants to know, what data did you use to present?
Yeah, great question. The bulk of the data really was derived from a Delphi survey to thousands of participants, sort of a semi-curated list of experts spread across the world, covering all regions, but really experts involved in various disciplines well outside of the environmental domain. And we did that deliberately, right? And it goes back to this issue of looking in places where you're not looking. If you're talking to environmental scientists, in the case of this, our domain area, you're highly likely to be in a bit of an echo chamber. And so we sent out this Delphi survey. It's a 2-part survey to somewhere in the order of 6,000 individuals. And that's where we received these about 1,200 so-called signs of news, signals of change. And so that was the basis and really the foundation for a lot of what we've developed. Of course, what we did with that data and how you structure that and prioritize it, if you will, it's just not the right word, but distill the noise from perhaps what could be something that is truly disruptive to planetary health or well-being. That's a process. Yeah, but great question.
Thank you. Thank you so much. There are quite a number of questions. Maybe we'll take a second round and go to part 2, where we need to understand critical enablers of all this UN 2.0 with the skill set that we have mentioned. And I would like to kind of catalyze and ask the presenters, how do you embed or scale new approaches into an organization? We can start with Jorge and go to Reina, then Jason.
Great, excellent, a great question. I think the very first element or the initiative that we have done at Embed within the World Bank, this is our experience, has been to try to really incorporate this and this is a word that I've heard a lot already as part of the name of the team, embedding our approach into the operations and the activities that the World Bank has done. So that's the very first one, but you quickly run into the challenge of capacity. As I mentioned before, that might be the interest even internally at the World Bank, but then the big question is, how do you implement this? And for that, we have put a lot of effort into creating public goods, knowledge public goods. So that could be specific knowledge products like toolkits, for example, the ones that I shared at the end of the presentation, or doing a lot of hand-holding with the project teams within the bank, and that includes also training and capacity building. So that has been, this is a summary of the way we have proceeded in terms of embedding behavioral science in the World Bank.
Sure. From the digital angle, one thing that we noticed is the importance of having a multidisciplinary team at the beginning when we have to show quick results. It's easy to fall back into only having these innovation people working on it, but it's hard in the beginning. It's a lot of investment, but we try to work with all the technical experts and also get external views. We work closely with other agencies as well at this very beginning, so that we try to get the first quick success story right. And then after that, I guess we all go back to this embed, but we try to, again, embed it in the theory of change. We try to also work through the existing channels of the organization. For example, we have a chief digital office who's sitting in executive office at UNDP, but I myself is already embedded in the nature and climate hubs of UNDP, so that I'm a part of the team, and the team growing under this team is also they all have this technical expertise that cross-cuts digital and the thematic area, so that we start to learn faster. And as you know, again, as JL was saying, there's more knowledge coming out and knowledge management in order to make this catalytic change. So yeah, I'll stop there and pass it to Jason.
Thank you, Rena.
Thanks very much. And at the risk of sounding repetitive now, but I think my colleagues have mapped out that anytime you have a proposition for an organization that really requires changing behavior, changing how we're doing things, it's not going to happen overnight. And I think really understanding that and setting realistic expectations for the pace at which this change happens. In some cases, I think if you hurry it too much and it's forced, you leave a lot of people behind. And what we have found in our process, and we very much are learning and building the muscle of foresight at the same time that we're developing a foresight process. So going out to the world with something to say about signals of change, we're doing that, and we did it quite deliberately at the same time as learning how to do this, quite frankly. And that's because foresight, at least in this case, and strategic foresight in particular, it's a practice. It's a practice, and that's something that doesn't have a clear beginning, a middle, and an end. It's kind of ongoing. So we have found that setting up the proposition of embedding foresight into the organization needs to be seen that way. The other things that my colleagues have alluded to, and I'd mentioned before, I think that foresight or any change agent can't be incubated in one part of the organization. I happen to be embedded in this process for the moment. The Office of the Chief Scientist is the custodian of foresight. It was done that way so that we could make sure it was a really evidence-based approach. But eventually, there's a handoff. There's a handoff to the programmatic elements of the house, the policy elements of the house, if you will, and that's where it really needs to take flight.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We'll open again the Q&A so that we can interact better with our participants. Please keep sending your questions. I'll go back to JL from the Q&A. There's a question that says, what does the timeline look like for the project that you have explained? And how do you ensure the fundamental and long-term change of behavior is observed?
All right, so in terms of the timeline, this specific project took a while. It was the first time we did research like this. And as I mentioned, we tried to make it as rigorous as possible. I mentioned the different techniques that we use, and that are very time consuming. So specifically, we started in 2019 with the diagnosis work that included field data collection, and that's very time consuming. It was the middle of the pandemic as well, so even more challenging. And we ended up the intervention, which is the last step of the loop that I showed last year. So as you can see, it was very time consuming, going over 3 and 4 years, which is a luxury in some cases. But after we learned about this, we learned the experiences, and we're able to go a little faster by replicating some of the results. We can shorten that timeline of implementation to a year. So starting again with the diagnosis, data collection, doing it in a few months just to understand better the context, to adopt the materials to the context, and then finishing with the intervention and evaluation. I think that's the shortest that I would recommend for this type of interventions. And then the second part on long-term change of behavior, that's always a question we have on behavioral science. And it's very difficult, to be honest. It would imply more resources for further research if you want to continue, and if you have the capacity and possibility of continuing following up on the behaviors of participants. For this specific project, we will try to do so as part of the continuing work with the government, but usually it's an open question to follow up with additional surveys and more research to be done. But it is a great question. What I would suggest, again, is just to keep it in mind as part of your additional research efforts in the future.
Thank you. Maybe we need some foresights into how behaviors can change.
That's a great point.
Yes. Some work from Jason.
Yes.
Yes, and to you, Rena, how does the work you have described connect to just transition, especially ensuring disaster risks are reduced and maladaptation?
Sure, thank you for the question. So the transparency, it covers everything in the NDC, and in case of countries, the developing countries, a lot of the NDCs already cover the adaptation needs as well as our targets, as well as the mitigation targets. So the system that I just described today as an example, that would be collecting these adaptation needs and targets so that the countries can also start to work toward mobilizing resource around it. But just to note that outside of this project, we do have a lot of digital projects or digitalization happening in the adaptation and disaster risk reduction across the organization. So, not it's not necessarily what I am doing personally, but for example, in India, there is a system that was built as a digital public good where you can actually look at the agriculture policies and see how the adaptation impact was they're using AI and machine learning and also ground proofing that data using citizen science. So that could be an interesting project to look into. We also have some disaster risk reduction projects where we look at the vulnerability of different geospatial locations, based on all the climate change that's happening and also other types of social vulnerability or risks that are in the region. So that kind of thing is happening. And of course, there's all the more traditional way of approaching the early warning system. If you look at all these weather-based early warning system, you need to digitalize all the weather data. Like in Malawi, supported the country to basically put all the paper-based weather information into a digital database, and that's the base of all of the forecast and AI-based solutions that could come in the future. So I think in that sense, we're trying to really build that first round foundational building blocks to start to get to all of those promising future that the digital technologies seem to bring to us.
Thank you, Rina. And there's a question for all the presenters in the spirit of leaving no one behind. From youth, from young people, what ways can we better engage and empower the youth as active participants in driving climate change solutions? We can start with you, Rina. You're still on the screen, and then we can go to Jason and Jael.
Sure, well, definitely. I mean, youth have a different, and again, I'm going to talk from the digital angle today, but youth is at the forefront of digital. You're a different generation that knows how to use digital the best way. And I think the biggest thing I see for the generation is that you can probably think of different business models. Digitalization is not about not working things go faster, right? It's about changing the way we do business. How can we create different decentralized business models? And I think raising a voice to find different ways of approaching the problem that we have is really what I see is important from the youth. And I hope in a lot of these national climate change discussions and also adaptation discussions, we do try to engage the youth in these conversations. I think, participating in those policy discussions is extremely important, as well as, of course, if you're interested in entrepreneurship, building these different solutions from a different angle so that we don't try to do wrong things better. We want to do different things. So from my end, it's more of a call to action, but I'd love to see that happening and partner with you more. Thanks.
Definitely. Any ideas, Jason, on youth inclusion?
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic question. It's the question of the moment, and it cuts across all of these areas. Every one of the changes that the quintet is calling for, really, I think the youth perspective and empowerment needs to be at the center of them. In the case of Foresight, like we were able to disaggregate our data and understand, the sentiments we were getting from not just different geographies, but different segments of society, and where we saw the biggest change, the biggest, let's say, delta. It was clearly the views and perspectives of the youth, whether it be on risks, the potential for something to be an opportunity or disruptive. And, it really, I think, is proof positive that we need to be very, very deliberate about how we engage the youth. We're talking about scaling, solutions in this session. And I think bringing in innovation to the table, whether it be a climate innovation, a decarbonization innovation. There's, of course, the aspect of making sure the technology is ready and mature and the innovation can take flight. But I think the chasm is really in adoption. And this is where I think, we're talking about, in most cases, technologies that need to be inherited by a segment that's not scarcely being tested, if you will. And that's where I think, I reflect back on stealing, JL's example about the cook stoves. 20 years ago, we thought that we were gonna hit that out of the park. And that we really have traction and be able to scale, clean cook stoves in certainly where I am in East Africa. And it didn't happen because of, social translation problems. And I think had we focused more on youth, we would have perhaps intercepted that. And so it's a fantastic question. I think it's, as Raina said, it's something that we need to keep top of mind and make a deliberate effort to ensure that we are understanding the delta between what we're thinking and what this next generation is thinking.
Great. JL, with the example from Rwanda, how do we engage the youth?
It's an excellent point. I think it's agree that it's a fantastic question. I would say, I would try to exemplify it like this. There's a behavioral insight that it's called the fresh start principle. And the idea is that in this case, with this generational shift, it's just the right moment to change the mindset of the population and really try to incorporate behavioral science into our day-to-day, and especially for what we do in the work of policy. And I'm stealing this also from Jason. He mentioned the idea of changing mindsets. And that's the key for scaling behavioral science in policy. And I think that the easiest way is just precisely to use the existing tools. I think most of the knowledge related to behavioral science, because it's very much driven by user experience, is out there, is publicly out. And, having and engaging youth through digital channels, it's just the key way to do so. So again, I invite you to take a look at our resources, and yes, try to educate yourself with this amazing science, the behavioral science.
Thank you. And as you say, trying to educate ourselves, we have a common shared recommendations and questions from participants, and I'll use it as a last round from all of you on how does one follow up or have learning materials. We have a question on whether UNEP has a course on foresight, whether there's a portal that someone can learn on digital public goods. Where are the resources if somebody is new and wants to understand, wants to engage? What is the starting point? Start with you, JL, because you just mentioned about people engaging and learning and capacitating themselves more. Then we can go to Jason and finish up with Raina.
Right, so I'll invite you to check out precisely what is being shared on the chat. There's specifically the results from the intervention in Rwanda. There's also a very interesting toolkit that we prepared as part of this work to incorporate behavioral science into energy access programs. So it's very specifically tailored to this challenge for those who have asked about this on the chat. But I'm also sharing on the chat our own website. That's a great resource if you're interested on the application of behavioral science for any developing challenge. So really invite you and encourage you to check it out.
Great. Jason?
Great, yeah, and I'll do the same. I'll put some links into the chat on where you can get some resources, both in terms of the insights and the work that we're doing. But I really want to, I think, direct people to UN Global Pulse, which is an entity that is doing precisely that, providing training, providing the materials so that all people, practitioners, experts, non-experts, can really understand the various tools that this world of foresight entails, whether it be on scenarios or horizon scanning, or really just getting comfortable with embracing visions of of both uncertainty and the future. And so I think UN Global Pulse is a great resource, but I'll put some links in the chat. Thanks.
Thank you.
Sure.
Reina?
Yes, I think Johanna already shared it in the chat, but we do have a community of practice where you can watch all of the recordings from past videos where we started from the presenting some design of the transparency system that we spoke about today. And it's an ongoing community of practice. So I'd really welcome you to join that. There's also a blog or actually a blog and a website that was also shared. So those we will continue to update new project examples there. And also, if you're interested in digital public goods, there is something called the Digital Public Good Alliance. And in that alliance website, you can find what are the criteria to become a digital public good, as well as accredited solutions. So if you're looking for something, you can use open source in your problem areas, I would really recommend you to check that out and see if you can find an existing solution there. Thanks for sharing, Johanna.
Thank you. Thank you. We have come to the end of the panel discussion, and to me, it really sounds catalytic, and just I would invite participants to really look at the resources and engage as far as they can. I'm sure it's not so much overwhelming in the different capacities. I would like to give you a warm thank you to our three presenters, Reina, Jael, and Jason. Really insightful. And me personally, I look up at the resources. And to our participants, I encourage you to participate in our ongoing sessions in this week of UN 2.0. They're amazing sessions you can check up on the website, and this recording will also be shared. Thank you to the coordinators who are on the background. They have done a great work in coordinating and ensuring that we all appear and we can all present our materials. Thank you, and looking forward to engage in other sessions. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thanks very much,
Thank
everyone.
you so much.